Hi, you're listening to Childless and Moving Onward. This is the place where we talk about thriving in life when you're a woman who is childless, not by choice, regardless of the road that brought you to childlessness. Right, welcome to episode 64 of Childless and Moving Onward, where I navigate the complex terrain of involuntary childlessness. I explore the difficult emotions, the challenging path of pain, and the possibility of transformative journeys of those who didn't choose this path. I'm your host, Gail Miller. I'm a physician, coach, speaker, and I'm childless by circumstance, not by choice. So I walk this path myself. Now, I want to start by facing something that's usually assumed but isn't correct. And that is that grief is only about the death of someone. Now, while that may be the most devastating of griefs, what's not acknowledged is that in reality, there are actually many types of grief, in addition to grief about losing someone you had. It's also about losing dreams, futures, identities you hoped for, and many other types of losses. And for millions of women and men who are childless not by choice, this grief is real. It's profound. But unfortunately, it's also invisible most of the time. Why is it invisible? Because it's not recognized. Either it's a grief that others don't even think about, or a grief that others don't validate. They don't believe there can be grief for a life that wasn't lived, or they just don't want to hear about it or know about it. They don't want to acknowledge it exists for some people because it's uncomfortable for them. They realize it's a grief they couldn't even imagine dealing with. So thinking about it is just too much for them. Or it just makes them uncomfortable because, well, the whole pity aspect of it. They just want this grief, the idea of it, to go away. Which is ironic because it's certainly not a grief we want to feel. But it's so uncomfortable for so many others to think about a life without children that they don't want to face it. They don't want to face that it exists. They don't want to talk about it. So what does that mean for those of us experiencing it? We have to keep this grief to ourselves. Now, we don't actually have to. Nobody is directly making us. But we decide for ourselves because, well, what's the point? Talking about it gets us nowhere. Actually, in some ways, it's worse than nowhere. It gets us more pain because others don't want to hear it. They want us to move on, get over it, or at the very least, please just pretend the grief doesn't exist around us as how they feel. Because again, they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with their own discomfort. They don't believe it's real, and it makes them uncomfortable. So what do they do with this grief that they don't want to exist, if they even believe it's possible to feel grief over this? What do they do with it? They make sure we keep it to ourselves. And that's what happens. We end up keeping this grief to ourselves, not because we truly want to, but because we feel like we have to. We end up with an incredibly strong need to stay silent about something so profound. We keep quiet in part as self-protection. Have any of you ever tried to share your pain What happened? Were you met with awkward silences or dismissive comments? How about hurtful advice? It could have been well-meaning, but regardless of intent, it's painful to hear advice that is anything but helpful. Why don't you just adopt? Maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe you didn't try hard enough. And even maybe you did something to deserve this. Seriously. If any of you are listening because you're here trying to figure out how you can help someone you know through the pain of their unwanted childlessness, these are things others have said, and they're not one-offs. So for those of you who are dealing with involuntary childlessness, have you ever opened up and then someone immediately changed the subject or told you to look on the bright side? Over time, the messages these responses send is that our grief makes others uncomfortable or our grief isn't valid. So what do? Well, instead of risking more hurt, we withdraw. Sometimes we pull away from any contact. We isolate ourselves physically and emotionally. But sometimes we are with others physically, but in no way are we emotionally or mentally present with them. So we each learn to wear a mask. We put a fake smile on our faces and say we're okay, no matter how not okay we are. Because it feels safer to put on this phony act. Safer than opening up and showing how we truly feel, only to be met with all the hurtful ways that others invalidate us, that others show they won't support us, and all the ways that they show that their discomfort with our pain is valid and matters, but our feelings don't. But the whole time that we feel forced to wear these masks, inside, the grief is present, and it feels like our hearts have exploded, and the pain is searing. So the grief remains unspoken, unshared, unacknowledged, and invalidated. Keeping it hidden makes that grief so heartbreakingly lonely. It's also absolutely exhausting. On its own, grief is tiring, to say the least, emotionally and physically. It takes a toll. But then when you add on the isolation, the invalidation, the lack of understanding that comes with feeling the need to hide our grief, that exhaustion is overwhelming. It's another layer of fatigue. It feels like having run an emotional marathon. It just feels easier to say nothing at all than to risk what we know is coming if we talk about our grief. And who wants to add on the judgment, the being judged for not fitting into the expected mold of what a woman is supposed to be? So, bringing up our genuine sorrow, it's opening up another level of vulnerability in general. But to do that and have our feelings invalidated, diminished, and disrespected, why would we put ourselves through that? So we don't. It's just easier that way. Or is it? What happens when you can't talk about that grief, when you feel you have to keep it hidden? Grief needs space. It needs to be acknowledged and expressed. With the death of a person, there are rituals, there are memorials, visitations, cards that express sympathy. People bring food. Now, it's different when it's not the death of a person and when it's the death of a future that won't happen. So one of my favorite quotes about this, I mean, there's not a whole lot of talking about this, but one of my favorite quotes is from Laura Bush, who wrote, "The English language lacks the word to mourn an absence. For the loss of a parent, grandparent, spouse, child, or friend, we have all manner of words and phrases, some helpful, some not. Still, we are conditioned to say something, even if it's only, 'I'm sorry for your loss.' But for an absence, for someone who was never there at all, we are wordless to capture that particular emptiness. For those who deeply want children and are denied them, those missing babies hover like silent, ephemeral shadows over their lives. Who can describe the feel of a tiny hand that is never held?" It just so eloquently and perfectly describes this loss and the additional pain of not having a word, a term that fits it, for not having a ritual to honor and mourn it. There is no ritual for the loss of a future. None. And mourning for this, it's not considered acceptable. So when you can't express your grief, you're carrying a very heavy weight. And it does weigh on you emotionally and physically. The silence, it highlights and increases the feeling of isolation and loneliness. So you end up possibly avoiding things, holidays, celebrations, baby showers, and even everyday events and conversations, like maybe lunchtime at work. And the grief stays bottled up. Does this resonate for you? If so, leave a comment. Share your experiences and know that you're not alone, and show other women and men who are childless not by choice, show them they're not alone either. That's how we take care of each other. But also know that your grief is valid. You deserve to express it. For your well-being, expressing your grief is a must. Unfortunately, those who should support us often don't when it comes to our grief. So we have to take care of ourselves. So what is taking care of ourselves? Start with creating your own rituals. Society doesn't have rituals to honor our grief, but that doesn't mean we can't create our own. Light a candle. Plant a tree. Set aside a day to honor your feelings. Write a letter expressing your feelings or memories. You can keep it, bury it, or burn it as a symbolic act of release. For some of you who have been through fertility treatments, you may still have supplies left over, or those after visit summaries that some healthcare systems provide. Burn them safely, cut them up, shred them. Take those supplies, and maybe you want to, if they're donatable, donate them. And if not, maybe you want to smash them to smithereens. Make your own rituals. Create art, music, or poetry as a way to process your emotions and commemorate your experience. Design a ceremony that feels meaningful to you. There is no right or wrong for any of this or for such a ceremony. And having one is about you, your needs, how you need to grieve and mourn. The mourning process is individual. And it's not about whether society says you should or shouldn't do this. Leave them out. It's about you and your needs. There are also spaces to connect with other women who are childless. There are spaces of support, and some of it is just plain old camaraderie. I mean, how nice to have conversations with other women without it being about all things kids. There are online and in-person communities. And one option I have is a free monthly support group. You can check that out, the link in the show notes. But there are many options. And for those of you who are here because you want to support somebody who's childless not by choice, first, thank you. Many of us don't have anybody in our lives, or have very few, who are willing to go this step and to support us. So thank you. But right after this, here's important advice. Listen. Don't offer solutions. Don't offer advice. Just hold space for the person you care about. This is a really vital message I want to leave with those of you who are dealing with this grief. Grief is not a weakness. It's a memorial to hope and the longing for a future you won't have. If you're carrying this silent sorrow, if you're wearing a mask to keep your grief invisible, you're not alone. There are others walking this path. And together we can make space for all kinds of grief, even this invisible kind. Thank you for joining me today. That's it for today. If you'd like to share your story, connect with others, or find resources, check out the show notes for links and other ways to support yourself. All right, that's it for today, and I will be back with you next week. I'm so glad you joined me. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you liked it, you can find more tips, insight, and support in a private space with other women who are like you, so they get you. You can do that by joining my free Facebook group, When Being Childless Isn't by Choice. Join us by clicking on the link in the show notes. You can also stay up to date with me on Instagram at Childless Path Onward and Facebook and YouTube at Path Onward. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.